Colonel H. Jones and his men. And the locals came too to say their farewells and their thanks to the Paras. The service was a short one. The dead had already been buried with full military honours at Ajax Bay shortly after the battle. Major Chris Keeble, the man who'd taken the battalion on to victory after Colonel Jones had fallen, read a passage from the Gospel.
A man can have no greater love than to lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends, if you do what I command you.
And then the locals paid their own tribute and laid 2 wreaths at the foot of the cairn with the simple message, "We will not forget."
At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
And then the little ceremony was over. The Paras had paid their last respects on the field that had brought them both glory and the pain of mourning. And as they left, the lone piper came out of the gorse that had once marked the front line and played a lament that was almost carried away on the biting wind. He picked his way through the craters left by the artillery and mortar fire of the battle and passed the spot where Colonel Jones had died.
Mount Harriet had just fallen, and the British troops in Mount Kent were receiving prisoners.
Many of the prisoners that came down from Mount Harriet were still armed, although in no state to use their weapons, and worried about what the British would do to them after they'd given up. Among them were a couple of officers, including a lieutenant colonel, who seemed to be carrying more cigarettes than vital information. And there was this young Argentine soldier being brought in on a stretcher, suffering from the effects of the artillery bombardment. In general, the Argentines seemed again to be relieved that for them the fighting was over and they could stop living what must have been a nightmare existence of trying to survive the shell fire, knowing that, as indeed happened, it would be followed by an infantry assault. The Royal Marines, perhaps equally naturally, were in high spirits as they saw the prisoners coming in. But all the while, the guns of 29 Battery were being trained and fired on the new objectives ever closer to Stanley. From the Two Sisters, the Royal Marines threaded their way carefully down the pass, but the route was blocked by minefields, and every few minutes the column dragged to a halt as the way was carefully cleared. A technical officer came back with some of the anti-personnel and anti-tank mines that had been laid to trap us.
In fact, what you do is unscrew the tops of the plates on the anti-personnel mines, and they are then armed. But as of yet, they haven't been armed. The anti-tank ones, however, have been. The safety plate has been removed, and that is ready to detonate.
And then the almost unbelievable news that there wasn't going to be any Argentine opposition in Stanley. There was, after all, apparently not going to be a last fight. A Union Jack was hastily brought out of a man's pack and attached to his radio aerial. And then there it was, Port Stanley, closer than any of us had ever seen it before. Amid the devastation were a few straggling Argentines who'd not been able to get back to the eastern side of the town before the British had arrived. And there were some very happy paratroopers, delighted and excited that it seemed at last to be all over.
Who was the first to put up the flag?
Two para!
I put it up again. Two para the first in again?
That's right.
Yes, again.
Two para was first in.
How much did you beat the others?
2.5 hours.
At the airport itself, the scenes of devastation were greater than anywhere else I'd seen. It was the aftermath of a long campaign, one that had cost many lives, and one that so many people in uniform, and indeed in plain clothes, have told me was so unnecessary. But now it was all over, and the pieces of shattered lives and broken properties could start to be put back together again.
A lightning strike on the launch site in a Florida thunderstorm last night gave Columbia a rough and realistic